So there's an interesting situation developing with the EBU heavyweight title. The story was that Teper was injured and therefore vacated the title, and that Robert Helenius would fight Rill in a fight that occurred last weekend, with the winner having to defend against Teper. A lot of us hardcore boxing fans were really looking forward to Helenius Teper. You know, that seemed to be a really, really interesting fight. Also, there was a lot of talk about certain British interest in the bout. Could Anthony Joshua fight for the European title? Could Derek Chisora fight for the European title? But I kind of thought that both of those routes were unlikely, because Teper was due to fight the winner of that match rather than someone new to the fray like a Chisora or a Joshua. Now, the news has broke today, and it's on various sources. I don't have one specific source, but if you Google it, it's very much out there. That Teper has apparently tested positive for a banned substance, following on from his win over David Price. You got to feel a bit for David Price. He's lost to two fighters, Tony Thompson and Teper, both of whom have tested positive after beating him. There is actually, and I'm not saying this to get a cheap laugh, there is actually a strong argument to say that David Price should still be an unbeaten heavyweight. You know, arguably the wins that Tony Thompson and Teper enjoyed over him should be overturned, given the circumstances that were involved in both of those situations. Now, that's an aside, and we'll leave it there. But Teper is obviously now facing some time out of the sport. Who knows what sort of effect that's going to have on his career? Who knows whether he'd be the same fighter whatsoever if he wasn't taking the banned substance. I mean, look at Larry Olibamawo. He was going on a winning streak, knocking everyone out, comes off the juice, and suddenly he's being disposed of in 20 seconds by Hughie Fury. You know, it's got the potential that some sort of substances can affect your game that much. So now we've got the winner of Helenius Rill, which, if you don't know, was Robert Helenius. Now, I didn't watch that fight this weekend, but I have seen a few clips of it on YouTube, and whilst I haven't sat down and watched the full fight, I've watched 3 or 4 rounds. Helenius is a guy, for me, who, well, for a start, what I will say is he's absolutely massive. You know, he's a massive, massive man. He was fighting an opponent who was stepping up massively in class, but was undefeated and seemed to have a very, very good chin. And Helenius put in a very dominant performance. He dropped the opponent twice, I think, early on, and pretty much outboxed Rill for the rest of the fight. You know, what it appeared to me is that Helenius started quite quickly, threw some pretty heavy punches early on, and then as the fight got later, seemed to just follow Rill around the ring a bit, throwing a bit of a jab, doing enough to outpoint him, probably not really pushing as hard as he could for the stoppage. And, you know, Helenius, to me, became slightly slower, slightly one-paced towards the end of that fight. Let me know your thoughts on that fight, if you've sat down and watched the whole 12. Because, as I say, I've only watched 4 or 5, but I think Robert Helenius is there or thereabouts. You know, he's probably a top 20, top 25 heavyweight in the context of today's division. But I wouldn't really be picking him in any of the big fights at present, because, you know, whilst he does have good knockout power, and whilst he appears to have a good chin, some slightly less impressive fighters, you know, Michael Sprott went the distance with him only 3 or 4 years ago. Rill went the distance with him. Derek Chisora went the distance with him. You know, I don't think he's got crazy one-punch knockout power. He's certainly a less impressive puncher and prospect than Luis Ortiz, for example, who also fought last weekend. But let me know your thoughts on that fight. But I guess the question is, with Teper now sidelined, and with Robert Helenius now the European champ, does this make Robert Helenius a viable option for either Chisora or Anthony Joshua? And I think it possibly does. Anthony Joshua now is a pay-per-view fighter. I don't think Eddie Hearn's going to want Anthony Joshua fighting off pay-per-view. And I think with the pressure Eddie Hearn is probably under to make pay-per-views happen at present, I think he almost can't afford to have Anthony Joshua fighting on any bill that isn't pay-per-view. So I suspect he's going to be looking at fights, he's going to be looking at opponents who he can sell as a pay-per-view fight. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying for 1 second Anthony Joshua versus Robert Helenius is a classic pay-per-view fight, not in my book. But what we must remember is that Anthony Joshua, Dillian Whyte did absolutely superb numbers when he, when on Anthony Joshua's pay-per-view headline debut. They sold 450,000 pay-per-views. Didn't Golovkin versus Lemieux do less than 100, and Joshua did 450. I feel that somewhat reinforces the point I made in the lead up to the fight, that what makes a pay-per-view fight and what makes a pay-per-view event is not necessarily having a world title on the line, it's the storyline. Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte, they had that storyline and they had it in abundance. There's less of a storyline there with Chisora or Helenius, but I think having that European title on the line perhaps adds something to the mix. And they're both actually intriguing matchups. Helenius is a very tall guy with power and a good chin who's undefeated. Derek Chisora, he's just so well known in the British boxing circuit. He's fought big names for years: Klitschko, Williams, Fury again, Hay. Chisora is just such a facet of the British boxing game that maybe I could see it. And I think that all these things are related together. Helenius's performance this weekend, well, to me, he looked decent, but not very exciting. Not very, he didn't look towards the top of the heavyweight division based on that performance. And Teper's bad. These things all link together to mean that Anthony Joshua versus Helenius is possibly more likely, or maybe Chisora to fight Helenius with Anthony Joshua fighting the winner. I don't know, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Price Teper, Helenius Rill, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, would Chisora or Anthony Joshua now step up to fight Helenius for the European titles? Obviously, Chisora Helenius had that very controversial first fight, and that'd be a rematch a lot of people would be interested in. And I think Derek Chisora would like to avenge what he perceives to be some injustice there. Let me know your thoughts. As always, many thanks for tuning in.